Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison's Select Reserve.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Africa Prime. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. Now we are starting to see the end of the Industrial Revolution as we know it. And in the new carbon-neutral economy, the world's most advanced economies would rank at the bottom. In this new world order, the emerging nations of the South possess all the opportunity, innovation, and creativity. These are not my words. These are the words of Jose Maria Figueres, former President of Costa Rica, first CEO of the World Economic Forum, and a member of the board of the Carbon War Room, founded by, amongst others, billionaires Richard Branson and Mark Shuttleworth. In this special edition of Africa Prime, he spoke to Buntu Williams.
I believe that we live in challenging times. This is a great time to live in terms of our possibilities to deal with the challenges that we have been dealing for many years and to deal with new challenges as well. There are two wars that we need to fight and win. One is the war on poverty, and today we have amassed sufficient economics to do that and sufficient technology to help us. And the other one is the war on climate change, which by far is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. Those two wars today can be won with the same instruments, and the private sector and business are a key component of helping us achieve victory. I very strongly believe in what you have addressed, and let me call them multi-stakeholder platforms. Development is just too important to be left in the hands of governments by themselves. Development is something in which we all have to actively participate. We speak about democracies. We all want more of our democracies. But democracies is not only being able to live in a certain way, it is also a certain number of citizen responsibilities. For democracies to work well, we all have to be responsible for helping it go forward. And when it comes to development, and when it comes to having democracy deliver on the goods, I believe that the private sector, and that's why I'm here, has a very important role to play. Universities have to come out of their environments and actively see how the knowledge, what they investigate, what they research, can be used in terms of the development of the country. Civil society has a great responsibility in terms of broadening understanding with the issues that we have to tackle. And governments need also to lead and to listen. Those are the combinations that when one looks at countries that have been successful in their development styles, one finds as thriving environments where development, country and national objectives of well-being can be ascertained, can be put together, and then can be driven by all sectors working together.
The current approach to climate change appears overwhelmed by indecision and political dithering. Would you agree?
I am often frustrated with how slow the governmental process of reaching an international agreement with respect to climate change moves. As you well know, we have the opportunity to further that dialogue in a couple of months when we will all be back here in South Africa for the meeting of COP17. And I hope that we will be able to further the agenda at COP17 here in South Africa. I hope we will be able to further international agreements with respect to technologies and sharing of technologies that can help us better cope with climate change, that we will be able to advance on how we are going to finance the transition towards a low-carbon economy, that we will be able to advance the agenda with respect to reforestation. It's such an important issue, very pertinent for Africa, that, by the way, is one of the continents that would suffer the most from climate change. But having said all of that, and keeping my hopes high for the intergovernmental process to move forward, there is no time to wait for governments. On this one, business has to lead. We need to make the transition to a low carbon economy a viable business opportunity. And by a low carbon economy, what I want to say is that I very strongly believe that perhaps we're coming to an end of 250,000 years of the Industrial Revolution, when we thought that resources in the world were limitless, when we did not think of the repercussions of a global population that is going towards 9 billion and that has the aspiration and every right to live in a much better way. The constraints put on developments towards the future by both a rising population on the one side and a planet with limits on the resources that we have oblige us to be much more efficient in the way we go about carving out better livelihoods for everybody in the planet into the future. That economy, being much more efficient, will also be an economy that emits a lot less carbon and therefore helps us combat climate change. In all of that, business has a very important role to play, and you already see leading businesses around the world that are doing that.
Can you elaborate on the Costa Rican approach to a carbon-neutral economy?
I believe very strongly that in the migration to low-carbon economy, one of the biggest failures of the global economy is not having a carbon tax today. It is something that some nations already begin to talk about. In Costa Rica, we enacted a carbon tax back in 1995. Payable at the gasoline station. When you buy gasoline or diesel or kerosene or gas as a combustible, you're going to be burning it in your motors or lanterns or whatever, emitting carbon into the atmosphere. Therefore, we thought, great to have a carbon tax that will allow the financing of environmental services that will clean the environment back up. So, the day after we enacted the tax, we dropped about 10 points on the polls. Of course, it was very unpopular at the time. Time has shown us that it was the correct measure to take. The carbon tax money was put into an environmental services fund. This fund began to finance the purchase of what we called environmental services. So farmers that were no longer growing rice as a cash crop, small farmers in rural areas that were no longer growing rice as a cash crop because they were not competitive, we encouraged them to grow trees. Now, trees in Costa Rica is a 15-year crop. Rice is a 3-month crop. How do they sustain their families until the trees are ready to be cut? What we did is we bought their crop of carbon fixed. Because as we know, when trees begin to grow up, through the process of photosynthesis, they suck carbon back out of the atmosphere and convert it into their growth, into biomass. They are fixing carbon out of the atmosphere. We can measure today how much carbon is being fixed by every tree species that is growing. We can therefore say these trees are going to fix X amounts of carbon tons. So we bought the future of that crop from the small farmers. We gave them cash for that crop. We packaged it in financial terms as if it were a commodity like pork bellies or tons of grains or bags of coffee, and we exported it into the international markets. So back in 1998, only 3 years after we enacted the tax, we exported the first 1 million tons of carbon fixed, certified by SGS out of Switzerland at $10 a ton. The beginning of a brand new industry, selling, first producing and then selling environmental services, creating jobs in rural areas, better livelihoods for small farmers that were before only living on subsistence from rice, which was not competitive, and creating a complete area of new entrepreneurship within the economics of the country. Difficult to pass the tax? Of course it was very difficult. As a matter of fact, reflecting on this, I dare say today that were it not for the fact that in the Costa Rican Constitution there is no re-election, no automatic re-election, neither for the president nor for Congress people. So if you're in Congress for 4 years, you cannot automatically re-elect yourself. You need to step out of Congress, and then if people elect you, you can come back 4 years later. If that had not been the case, most likely we would have not been able to pass that carbon tax through Congress, because people in public service would have been thinking more of how they re-elect themselves than of doing what was correct and right. And this, I believe, is a very fundamental issue that we have to deal with in our democracies today. Governments, more and more, live for what the popularity polls are going to say about the governments, and less for explaining what is correct and what has to be done.